week's break, and so we need to kind of refresh our memories as to where we are with our journey with Joshua. And so we begin tonight in chapter 3, Joshua chapter 3. And as was customary for Joshua, he rose early in the morning. And the Bible says they were moved from a place that the King James refers to as Shittim. It is another name for an acacia grove. In fact, I can show you on the map here that is behind me, if I can zoom in just a little bit on that this is on the other side. This is the Jordan River where this hand is coming down here. That's the Sea of Galilee right there, and that's the Jordan River, and it's coming on down into this area. This is where the children of Israel are located at the beginning of Joshua chapter 3. They're right here in this area, and they need to, of course, cross the Jordan in order to be able to get into the Promised Land. Now notice, if you will, in verse number 2, it came to pass after 3 days. Stop. That leads us back to chapter 1 and verse number 10 and 11. Notice in Joshua 1, 10 and 11, then Joshua commanded the officers of the people, saying, pass through the host, and command the people, saying, prepare ye victuals. Why? For within what? 3 days. You're going to pass over this Jordan to go in to possess the land which the Lord your God giveth you to possess it. And sure enough, what we find in Joshua chapter 3 is that after 3 days, the officers went through the host, commanded the people, and told them in verse 3, when ye see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then ye shall remove from your place, and you should follow after the ark. But notice what he says in verse 4. Make sure there's a space between you and it. Yet there shall be a space between you and it, the ark, about 2,000 cubits. That would be measured about 3,000 feet for the terminology that you and I are most accustomed to using. So God says, I want there to be like a 3,000-foot space between you and the ark that's leading you and going ahead in front of you. And he says in verse number 4, come not near unto it. Don't come near that ark. But notice the reason given is not the one that you see in Hollywood. It's true that Numbers 4:15 says you touch the ark, you die. That is a true statement. But the reason given here for why they weren't supposed to get very close to the ark at this point was that it was their GPS. Look at what he says. Come not near unto it, that ye may know the way by which you must go. For you have not passed this way heretofore. You've never gone on this journey before, and you're going to need, when you're traveling with 1.2 to 3 million Israelites, and the safe guesstimates would put it within that range, probably closer to 2 million Israelites, you can't just get right behind something and see where you're going. You need a little bit of space ahead of you so you can say, okay, they're going that way, and then the whole group has time to go in that direction as they follow. And it's true that the ark was to be reverenced and respected and not touched arbitrarily. Let's notice, if you will, please, Exodus 25. And I want to show you the significance of this ark leading the way. Why was it so important that the ark lead them across the Jordan? Watch Exodus 25 and look at verse number 8. God says, let them make me a sanctuary. Why? That I may dwell among them. What does he tell them in verse 9? They need to be careful to follow as they make this sanctuary. Follow the pattern. The Bible does teach pattern theology. It's not embarrassed or ashamed to do so. And then look at verse 17. Make a mercy seat of pure gold. 2.5 cubits shall be the length, and 1.5 cubits the breadth. And this mercy seat is supposed to sit on top of the Ark of the Covenant. Verse 21. In the ark you put the testimony that I'll give you. And watch verse 22 of Exodus 25. And there, where? On the mercy, above the mercy seat, above the ark, there I will meet with thee. I will commune with thee from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubims which are upon the ark of testimony, of all things which I give thee in commandment unto the children of Israel. And I wish we had time to go into a more detailed study of the tabernacle. If you were to study the tabernacle, you remember the Ark of the Covenant was not in the holy place, it was in the most holy place. And there was, within that most holy place, the glory of God hovered above that spot and marked it as a reminder to them that God was among them. God was with them, and that's why the Ark of the Covenant was the evidence of God's presence among them, and so He wants it to be that which leads them. Follow me, and I will lead you in the right direction. Have you ever had your GPS lead you in the wrong direction? You say, okay, I trust this thing, and it says you've reached your destination, and there's nothing but a cornfield, and you know that there's something more that you're looking for. Let me ask you, did God ever mislead His people or take them in the wrong direction? The Ark of the Covenant was the perfect GPS, and they could follow it knowing that God would lead them. In verse 5, Joshua said to the people, you need to set yourselves apart, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow, who will? The Lord will do wonders among you. Now, had these people seen any wonders before? Yes, their ancestors had in Egypt, in the plagues, and throughout the wilderness wanderings, there had been wondrous provision of food and water. And now it's time for them to see some more wonders. In verse 4, make it verse 6, Joshua spake to the priests, saying, take up the Ark of the Covenant. Now, how are they supposed to transport that? Go back to Exodus 25. And notice that in Exodus 25, He gives them very specific instructions for how to get the ark from point A to point B. In verse number 10, He told to make it out of what kind of wood? The same kind of wood that the place they were at was named after, because there was so much acacia wood there. Now, there had been acacia wood all throughout their wilderness wanderings, but it just so happens they're in a spot now that was renowned for it. And so He says, you make this ark. And by the way, you think of Noah's ark and how monstrously large it was. This is a small box compared to that. It's only 2.5 cubits long, and 1.5 cubits broad, and 1.5 cubits high. And so you overlay it with pure gold, and then what? Verse 12, I want you to cast 4 rings of gold, 2 rings on one side, 2 on the other. What do you do in verse 13? Make poles out of the same wood you made the ark out of, overlay them with gold. What do you do with the poles? Verse 14, put them into the rings by the sides of the ark. Why? That the ark may be borne, B-O-R-N-E, carried with them. And God says, I want you to leave those poles where they belong. Why? If you look, the tabernacle is constantly moving, right? From one place to the next. And then it stays as long as God's position hovers above them. Then they move on to the next place. Have you ever lost anything while traveling? It's easy to do, isn't it? And these people were told, when it comes to these poles, to transport the Ark of the Covenant, don't lose them. Don't misplace them, because they're needed. You remember when Uzzah touched the Ark of the Covenant and died for it? It's because they hadn't transported the ark in the God-approved way with the God-approved people, and that's what led to his demise. If they'd done what God said do and the way God said do it, they would never have been in that position. So here they are, take the Ark of the Covenant, take the poles, and start walking with it and leading the people. And then God tells Joshua in verse 7, this day will I begin to magnify thee in the sight of all Israel, that they may know this, as I was with Moses, what? So I will be with thee. You have the same divine authority backing you that Moses had. Just because Moses is gone doesn't mean that God is gone. God is very much present in this equation. He tells Joshua to command the priest in verse 8 that bear the Ark of the Covenant, when you come to the brink of the water of Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan. And Joshua says to the children of Israel, come here. Hear the words of the Lord your God. So God has told Joshua what he once said. Now Joshua is about to say it. And he said in verse 10, hereby ye shall know that the living God is, and what's the point? God is among you. You remember what Emmanuel means? God. You remember Jesus was called Emmanuel? What does that mean? God with us. Has this concept of God being with us been threaded throughout the entirety of God's divine revelation? Yes. You need to know I'm with you. What did Jesus say? Go into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature, make disciples of all the nations, and lo, I am with you always. I'm with you. I'm with you. I'll never leave you nor forsake you. And so here on this occasion, God wants the people to know, I'm with you, the living God is among you. And he will, verse 10, without fail. How certain? Without fail. Drive out from before you Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, Jebusites. Do you remember what the spies had said when they first saw some of these folks and they came back? We can't win this. We can't do this. And Joshua and Caleb said, oh yes we can. And now they're about to experience that as aged men. And you'll note here in verse number 11, behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth passes over before you into Jordan. Now had these people or their ancestors ever witnessed a sea crossing before, a water crossing before? When the children of Israel left Egyptian bondage, there was a Red Sea that was a big barrier between them and freedom, and yet it wasn't a barrier to God. God parted those waters, miraculously dried that ground, and they crossed through safely to the other side, and then the waters collapsed and took care of the Egyptians. Notice verse number 12. Take 12 men out of the tribes of Israel. Why 12? That's how many tribes. So every tribe would have a representative. Verse 13, it shall come to pass as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests that bear the ark of the Lord, and who is he again? The Lord of all the earth. He's got this. He can cover you wherever you are geographically. As soon as the soles of their feet rest in the waters of Jordan, that moment the waters of Jordan will be cut off from the waters that come down from above. They shall stand in a heap. This is where a little Bible geography is needed. But it's pretty fascinating, so I want to show it to you. This is one of the things that as you study Bible geography, you start realizing, okay, now this makes sense. I understand more and more what's going on here. There is the tallest mountain in the biblical world, in Palestine at least, would have been Mount Hermon. And I'm not sure what even with the resolution behind me maybe being a little darker than what I'm seeing on my screen here. Nevertheless, what do you see on top of this mountain, which is 9,200 feet tall? Snow. Well, what happens to that snow in the spring? It starts melting. And as it melts, of course, it's going to run down this mountain, and it's going to run into some waters here, tributaries and waters that will then start flowing into what will become known as the Jordan River, Sea of Galilee, 14 miles from here to here. And then those waters, if I zoom in here and just come in a little bit closer, and you'll see that I can actually straighten this out a little bit so we can come down at a straight shot. This is right here, this rift that runs from the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea. As the crow flies from here to here, 65 miles. Because of all the winding twists and turns of the Jordan River, if you're going to go by water of the Jordan to get from here to here, it's going to take you 200 miles of travel. Well, here's what's interesting. one of the places that, of course, we want to notice, let me go back to the Joshua chapter 3 and notice something here with you. How's this water going to be stopped? You see the town named Adam here? It's not just the name of the first man that ever lived. That is the name of this town. And according to your text, read here in verse 14 and following. It came to pass when the people removed from their tents to pass over Jordan, and the priest bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, as they that bear the ark were come to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brim of the Jordan. What happened, and what are we reminded of to make this even more impressive at this point in time? During this time of year, what would the Jordan have been characteristically doing? Overflowing all of its banks all the time of harvest. Flood stage for sure. I want to show you a quick video. It's soundless. I mean, you might be able to hear a little bit of the sound. I don't know. But this is the Jordan River at flood stage. And can you see, I can turn this up, but I don't know that you can hear it all throughout. I don't think you can. So just look how raging those waters are in the Jordan River during the time that it's at flood stage. And you see these fellows standing there, looking at it and keeping a safe distance from it. But those are raging waters. And as you think about those waters rising from the Jordan, what's interesting about that is that they were not being asked to believe that still waters could suddenly be calmed and parted. They were asked to believe that God could stop raging waters from coming down any further. God stopped up the waters at Adam, and the water started walling up there, and so they were then able to cross on dry ground. Now, I've seen in my studies, even this week, several people try to explain this as some kind of, they say it happened, and they point out that this is actually the Jordan River has stopped many other times in history. Well, I say many other times, a few other times. And what makes that particularly impressive is, as you know, the Dead Sea is the lowest spot on earth. It's the lowest spot on earth. So for waters to come from one of the highest spots in the area of Mount Hermon and to start flowing down, it's all downhill. Well, the more downhill the water comes, the faster it's going to rage, right? And so do you know that there have been 3 or 4 times, one of the most recent, 1927, when an earthquake in this rift caused the Jordan River, its banks of the Jordan, to start collapsing. That earthquake caused the banks of the Jordan River to start collapsing, and it actually walled up enough with the debris from the earthquake and the banks collapsing that it stopped the water from flowing for about 21 hours. This also happened, in the year 1500 and something. There have been some documented cases when the Jordan River stopped flowing, but this is miraculous. What we're reading about here is not just some natural occurrence because of a few factors. I want you to notice that as we read this, in verse 16, the waters which came down from above, and that's not from the sky, that's from the north, from Mount Hermon and those areas that were starting to flow into these streams. And by the way, if you go to Caesarea Philippi someday on the Bible Lands tour, you're going to stand up near the very area below Mount Hermon, and you're going, in fact, I took some video that I showed in my Bible geography class here that shows the water really rushing there. And those waters converge together and form the Jordan River, and then it just keeps rolling downhill and drops hundreds and hundreds of feet from sea level, above sea level at the Sea of Galilee, to the lowest spot on earth, about 1,300 feet below sea level by the time you get to the Dead Sea. But the waters at Adam were stopped up there, but there's something here that shows this is not just a natural occurrence. Look at verse 16. The waters which came down from above did what? Stood and rose up upon a heap, very far from the city Adam, that is, beside Zaratan, and those that came down toward the sea of the plain, even the salt sea, that's the Dead Sea, failed and were cut off, and the people passed over right against Jericho. Well, stop right now. Even if God stops the water, what is still going to be the case? As the water is stopped from flowing anymore, there's still water that's been here. And how are you going to be able to cross on dry ground? I know they did, because look at verse 17. The priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord did what? Stood firm on dry ground. And where? On the bank? In the midst of Jordan. In fact, all the Israelites passed over on dry ground until all the people were passed clean over Jordan. And so this is not just some natural occurrence that would require time for the water to dry up so they could walk firm. Look, you know as well as I do, after it's rained pretty well, you can go out and it's not raining anymore, but the water's still squishy, or the ground is still squishy, I should say, because of the water that's still there. And I don't know if squishy is a word or not, but it's going to be for tonight anyway. Yeah, you can hear it squish, squish, squish as you walk. Is there any squishing going on here? No. Look at chapter 4. It came to pass when all the people were clean, entirely passed over Jordan, the Lord spake to Joshua, I want you to take 12 men out of the people, one out of every tribe, a man, a representative. Command you them, saying, take ye hence out of the midst of Jordan, out of the place where the priest's feet, and we're reminded of this again, they weren't sinking in the muck and the mire. The priest's feet were doing what? Standing firm. In the midst of that, where the Jordan had flowed, in that very middle of the Jordan, what were they supposed to get? 12 stones. Carry them over with you, and leave them in the lodging place where you lodge this night. And so Joshua calls the 12 men whom he prepared of the children of Israel out of every tribe of man. And Joshua says, verse 5, here's what you do. Pass over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and take up every man of you a stone, put it on your shoulder. We're not told exactly the size of this, but it would be put on their shoulder. It's not just something they could carry in their hand. So they put it up on their shoulder, and let me show you this by going to the next chapter and highlighting one of these spots where they would end up ultimately taking it from where they were to Gilgal, which from the Jordan River was going to be about an 8-mile trip. Now, I don't know why I signed up to do this, but when I was in high school, there was a sectional basketball tournament that our Noblesville Millers were in. That was our school nickname. And I signed up, along with a number of others, to dribble a basketball for charity from Noblesville, Indiana to Carmel, Indiana, which was 7 or 8 miles away. And it was for charity, and I thought it would be fun. And after about the first mile, I didn't want to dribble a basketball anymore. And you dribble it and hit it off a rock and it goes flying into a ditch, and you know you have to go get it. And the glamour of it quickly went away. We were supposed to arrive at halftime of the sectional basketball game and come dribbling triumphantly into the arena. I don't think we looked too triumphant, at least I know I didn't. It started raining on us, we all looked like brown rats, and I vowed I would never dribble a basketball very far again. just pass it to me and I'll shoot a three-pointers, no dribbling. But you know, that was for charity, and that wasn't something that, I don't know, how long would it take for you to grow tired of carrying perhaps what is a fairly large stone on your shoulder for 8 miles? I think dribbling a basketball would be easier in some ways, and this is obviously much more sacred. What we're reading about here is a sacred significance, and we'll talk more about that here in just a moment. But notice what verse number 6 says, and this has often been used by we preachers for sermons about how we ought to educate our children about what we do and why we do it. In Joshua 4:6, what was the purpose of bringing these stones, each one having a tribe representative to carry this stone to build a memorial? Verse 6, that this may be a sign, a memorial literally, among you, that when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what do these stones mean? Literally, what do these stones signify? Then you should be able to answer them. Oh, this reminds us of when the waters of Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over Jordan, the waters of Jordan were cut off during flood stage, by the way, which was impressive that God can do that. It's easy. He made the waters. He can control the waters. And these stones shall be a memorial unto the children of Israel forever. And so your children need to know what these stones mean. And notice verse 8. The children of Israel did exactly what Joshua commanded. How many stones did they take up? 12. And incidentally, I hate to drive this into the ground in some ways, but we live in a culture where I think it has to be driven into the ground. In the Lord's church even, how the Bible authorizes. When God says take 12 stones, did he have to say don't take 13? Did he have to say don't take 6? Don't take only 7? What does 12 mean? Can they count to 12? Can you and I count to 12? They knew what 12 meant. And there was no reason to do anything other than what God had authorized. God authorized only 12 stones. Now, let me show you the difference between liberalism and legalism. We don't need either one. Liberalism says, not only do you not have to grab 12 stones, liberalism looses where God hasn't loosed. Liberalism would say, not only do you not have to grab 12 stones, really, you don't really have to grab a stone at all. If you come up with another plan that would be just as good. Innovate, substitute something of your own. Make a memorial to God out of something other than stones. And as long as you make it to God, he'll be pleased, right? That's liberalism. I'll show you legalism. What's legalism? Binding where God hasn't bound. God says, I want you to take it and carry it where? Upon his shoulder. Take you up every man a stone upon his shoulder. Legalism says, and let me show you the exact spot on your shoulder you better carry it. Yep. If you don't place it just at the spot we've chosen on your shoulder, then you're a liberal. No, you're not. You're a legalist for trying to bind what God hasn't bound. I can bind shoulder. I can't bind a location on the shoulder unless God does that elsewhere, and he does not, to my knowledge, ever do that. So you'll notice here in Joshua chapter 4, they're doing exactly what the Lord commanded. There's no addition, there's no subtraction. They're doing just what the Lord spake unto Joshua, verse 8. According to the middle of the verse, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, carried them over with them to the place where they lodged, laid them down there. And Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests which bear the Ark of the Covenant stood. And at the time that this book was written, those were still there. And who knows exactly what their status is, today, as far as you and I recognizing which stones would have meant which thing. But it meant something for them and was in place for a long time, and covered over perhaps again by the ravages of time and topography and topographical changes. But There was a way to see it back then. And notice verse 10, the priest which bare the ark stood in the midst of Jordan. How long did they stand there? Till everything was finished that the Lord commanded Joshua. So is this partial obedience? No. Let's do it all. Let's do everything God said to do. And according to all that Moses commanded Joshua. And then the people hasted and passed over. They hurried over. And it came to pass when all the people, again, we're talking, how long would it take to travel about 2 million people? You're not going to do it single file in a very fast fashion, are you? You have to spread out some. So we don't know exactly how far the breadth of that would have gone, but we know that God's capable of parting waters or stopping waters as much as He needs to create a wide enough swath to do that. And so when all of the people, verse 11, were clean passed over, the ark of the Lord passed over, and the priests in the presence of the people, and the children of Reuben and the children of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh, passed over armed before the children of Israel, as Moses spake unto them. Remember, he said, shall your brethren go to war, and you sit here? No, you're coming with us until we conquer the land. Then you can go back across the Jordan and have your farmland for your cattle. About 40,000 were, verse 13, prepared for war unto battle to the plains of Jericho. Now let me show you the area here of Jericho, because this is, it's known as, by the way, even to this day, it's known as the city of palm trees. If you go there, you're going to see, even to this day, it's populated everywhere with the palm trees. So here's the Jordan River. Their first stop, we know, ultimately would be Gilgal, but this is their destination. They're going to fight in Joshua 6, the Battle of Jericho, and so they're leaving the area here. They're coming to the Jordan, they're crossing, then they're going to come to Gilgal, and then they're going to ultimately end up here for the time being. If you'll notice there in verse number 14, God had told Joshua something back in 3:7. What had He told Joshua back in 3:7? This day will I begin to magnify thee in the sight of all Israel. And what does Joshua chapter 4 and verse 14 say? On that day, the Lord magnified Joshua in the sight of all Israel. And they feared him just as they feared Moses. All the days of his life, what did they realize? Hey, he's really from God. God is behind him. And what God's equipping him to do shows that God is making him the authoritative spokesman, and we need to listen. And so verse 15, the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, command the priests that bear the ark of the testimony, that they come up out of Jordan. And so notice Joshua, therefore, in view of the fact God told him to say it, commanded the priests, saying, come up out of Jordan. And it came to pass, when the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord were come up out of the midst of Jordan, and as soon as the soles of the priest's feet were on dry land, meaning the normal dry land on the banks, the waters of Jordan returned unto their place and flowed over all his banks as they did before. So that shows you too that this was miraculous. The timing of it was instantaneous for the stopping of the water and for the starting of the flow of the water again, for the drying of the ground. God is, look, once you get past Genesis 1:1 and believe it's true, do you have any trouble believing God could instantaneously dry ground once you realize He made ground? Do you have any trouble believing that God could stop water from rushing if He is the same one who made the water appear? He could make it disappear or hold it off from a place until He wanted it to come there. So this is what the Bible says they did. And then watch verse number 19. The people came up out of Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and encamped where? They come here to Gilgal. And he spoke to the children of Israel, saying, When your children shall ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what mean these stones? Then you shall let your children know, saying, Israel came over this Jordan on dry land. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of Jordan from before you, until you were passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up from before us until we were gone over, that all the people of the earth might know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, that you might fear the Lord your God. How long? Forever. Let me ask you, if you've been there on this occasion to actually see the raging waters stop rushing and to see the ground suddenly become dry enough for everyone to cross and to finally reach your destination. You know, that's what your GPS says when you get that you've reached your final destination. Well, they haven't reached their final destination yet, but they have definitely crossed the Jordan to reach the promised land, and there's more work to do, and we'll be studying about that in the weeks to come. But this is a marvelous, marvelous section of Scripture that sometimes gets overshadowed by what we study about the Red Sea. That's the crossing of water that we usually think of, and it's a good one, but this one doesn't need to be forgotten. They also crossed there at the Jordan, and what a marvelous celebration took place afterwards, and yet there was still work to do. There's still battles to fight, yes. Pardon me? Well, it would have taken some time. We don't know exactly how, again, wide the swath was, but it would have taken some time. It's not going to happen in 5 minutes. Yeah. So God is able to take care of all that, and He's got, and is God saying, oh no, I can only hold the water back for this long, so you all better hurry. God's got it, and there was no reason for them to be in any state of panic about it. So I'm thinking the bell normally rings at what, 7? There it is. Thank you very much.